So there's a race that is garnering a lot of attention in Arizona for the governor position. And the reason is because the candidate that is Trump-backed is going against a candidate that is being endorsed by what we now know is the more establishment, slightly more moderate branch of the Republican Party, people like Mike Pence. And we've seen this in a couple races now where Trump will endorse someone and Pence will endorse the other person. And it's a little bit, what the media is calling it, is proxy races. So it's the battle between the Pence brand of Republicanism and the Trump brand. The main difference between the two is, are you willing to recognize that the 2020 election wasn't stolen? And that's kind of where the big dividing line is now between establishment and Trumpsters. Anyways, so it's between the top front runners are Kari Lake, who is the Trump-backed person, and Karen Taylor Robson. So Karen Robson is endorsed by Pence. And we watched the debate on stream a couple weeks ago between all of the people in the field, but Kari Lake and Karen Robson. And it's so interesting watching the dynamic between an individual who's full, nutty, unhinged, election was stolen, and someone who's still trying to win voters who believe that, but is also trying to come off as a little bit more legitimate for the more moderate ones. And that's Karen Robson. So we're going to look at a few different things here. The first is seeing Kari Lake's response to Mike Pence endorsing her opponent. Reading from Mediaite, Republican candidate for governor of Arizona, Kari Lake, pulled no punches in recent days, attacking former Vice President Mike Pence, who has endorsed her opponent in the GOP primary. Lake, whose campaign has focused on pushing former President Donald Trump's debunked allegations of voter fraud in the 2020 presidential election, has also begun casting doubt on the legitimacy of August 2nd's GOP primary. Okay, so, quote, "I'm telling you right now," this is Kari Lake, "anybody trying to steal this, first of all, we're already detecting some stealing going on, but you guys know I'm a fighter, right?" So this is something we saw in the debate too, but she's saying it in rallies and all of these things. It is now the norm among whatever we want to call them, the MAGA part of the Republican Party, to just claim that elections are being stolen all the time. Okay, either they win and it was fine, or they win and it was attempted to be stolen, but they still won, but they would have won by more if it wasn't for that. Or they lost and it was stolen and they really won. It's like, and they'll, before the election even happens, say, as she just did here, quote, "we're detecting some stealing going on." I don't know what that means, but we're kind of detecting some stealing. And then more from her, quote, "we're not going to let them steal an election," she says. Okay, so they're trying to steal it like they did in 2020 from her perspective, but we're not going to let them. So now she's perfectly prepped that if she loses, it was stolen. If she wins, she's just such a good fighter that she fought through their attempts to steal it. So this is one of the first interesting dynamic that I was speaking about with these Republican primaries post 2020. I think 2020 and everything that happened because of that election is going to be a big defining moment in the Republican Party's kind of history, because this is when the split happens, and this is when you see the landscape really change, where the biggest litmus test to be a MAGA Republican is, will you scream about the election being stolen? But then, because so much of the Republican Party is MAGA, even more moderate Republicans don't want to clearly say the election wasn't stolen, so they just kind of avoid it, as we're about to watch right here with Karen Taylor Robson, who is the more reasonable, if you want to say that, who's endorsed by Pence.
Let's talk election integrity. Your opponent says she wouldn't have certified the election if she were governor, as Governor Ducey did. Would you have certified the election?
Well, I'm a lawyer. I'm a trained lawyer.
So the question is, as governor, you have responsibility to certify the election results of your state. So even though she's asking in terms of certification, the question is, do you think the election was stolen? That's the question. So would you have stood in the way of allowing the voices of your voters to be heard by citing these fraudulent claims, these fake fraud claims?
And I can't sit here and tell you without having been presented all the evidence. But there has been investigation after investigation. And are there things that need to be fixed? Absolutely. we have to require voter ID and increase penalties for ballot harvesting. But I'm looking forward. I'm looking at 2022 and doing everything I can to keep Arizona's governor's office in Republican hands. And that requires us to look forward and articulate a vision for the future of this state.
So this is the line that I hear from, if you watch any Republican primary debate, a congressional debate, a gubernatorial debate, senatorial, what you'll notice is when the question of the 2020 election comes up, because it always does, because that's the biggest defining feature among Republicans now, there'll always be someone on stage who says the election was absolutely stolen and blah, 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 Donald Trump is actually still should be the president. And maybe you'll have multiple of those, but then you'll almost always have someone who goes, listen, I either, like she said, I wasn't I wasn't shown all of the evidence, so I can't speak to that. If I was in the room, then I would be able to have a good answer for you. But the thing you always hear is, listen, I'm concerned with the next election. Let's look forward and not back. Which, let her continue, and then I'll make the point I'm about to make. Because it makes more sense within the context of her full response.
And that's what I've been focused on.
Well, it's important looking forward, of course. But looking forward is Donald Trump very likely running for president again. So this is an entirely pertinent question. Would you have certified the election as governor?
Again, like I said, I wasn't sitting there, as Governor Ducey was, presented with all the evidence. I have to assume, based on his looking at the evidence, that he did what he believed was right.
You've seen the evidence, you've seen the result of audits, we've all seen the information coming out of Arizona.
So good response from the host here. That's such a cop-out by saying, listen, I wasn't presented with it. The governor doesn't get a big report on, was this election stolen that's a gazillion times more expansive than what we have access to with the audits that were done in Arizona, all of the independent analysis that has been done, all of the court cases that have happened. We have access to that information. It's publicly available. If there was enough evidence of voter fraud to make any effect at all on the election results, that would be available to us this far out. That would have been uncovered, presented in some court case, and we would be able to see it. That's how that's how our systems are set up. And that's what we would be dealing with right now. So her pretending like, well, I'm not the governor, so I can't get the secret little file on if this election was stolen, that is nonsense.
He endorsed you.
There are investigations. There are investigations that are ongoing. And I tell everybody, when asked this question around the state of Arizona, my focus is on looking forward. I'm not going to get stuck looking in the rearview mirror. I am focused on looking forward and making sure we do everything we can to elect a Republican governor in Arizona, to nominate a Republican that can win in November. That is my focus.
So silly. So here's the point I want to make earlier. The answer of I want to look forward and not backwards in response to someone asking you, do you think the last presidential election was stolen? Ballots were flipped. Buckets of suitcases of ballots were shipped in with Biden's name on it. Different governments were hacking into our voting systems and flipping the names that were voted for and all those things. The reason why it's so silly to say, listen, I don't know if that happened or not, but I'm just looking forward, is because if that did happen, you shouldn't look forward. Holy smokes. If that actually happened in America, no, that's all we should be talking about. An election was stolen. People's votes were completely, their ability to voice their voice in our democratic process was completely revoked because it was flipped to the opposite candidate, even though that wasn't the will of the people. No, why would we move? Let's just think about the next election. Well, what if that's stolen, right? So if you did believe the election was stolen, you shouldn't want to go forward. If you had questions about it, why would you want to move forward? That's humongous. That would be the biggest story ever, always, for the rest of time, in terms of political stories. So the only reason you would just want to move forward is because you know it was a free and fair election. You know that these claims are lies, but you don't have the courage or integrity to go out and say that, because you know if you do, you'll lose enough support from Republicans where you won't be able to win against someone like Kari Lake. So, weird situation. I hope that she wins because she's better than Kari Lake, but she's also bad. And it also is an interesting dynamic to see Trump versus Pence in kind of a proxy war with who they're endorsing in these races.